this edition of the ATRA webinar series. Today's subject is going to be the 6T70 and some of the product issues we've had with the 6T70 transmission, as well as the updates that you can expect to see on the 6T70 series of transmissions themselves. So without further ado, let's do a little bit of housekeeping stuff. First off, on your connections, I know some of the guys are having problems this morning getting hooked up, so we'll probably have some guys join us as we start going through the presentation. Make sure that you're hooked to a hardwired connection, not through a wireless router. We've had several issues, especially with audio end of it. So make sure, you're hooked to a hardwired connection for your computer. Your handout, everybody should have received a PDF. You're going to want to put that on your computer someplace, because an awful lot of the information we're going to talk about when it comes to looking at the different pieces, you're going to have to be able to go back to that handout and physically ID the different parts that we're actually discussing here today. When it comes to the questions, if you have some questions, we'll gladly answer whatever kind of questions you got on the subject matter we're dealing with today. You're going to have a question box. That's the easiest way to ask the question. So you click on that box that says questions, type your question in, hit submit. It will send it over to me, and I'll have it pop right up on my screen, and I can ask you or answer your question that you have, obviously, at that time. Last but not least, the survey. The survey itself will follow our presentation today. So needless to say, if you get done with the presentation today, you should have a survey. We'd appreciate you filling out the survey and getting that survey back to us. I see we got a question popping up right now about getting the link for the handout. That should have been provided to you. Just contact Lance at lwiggins@atra.com, and he can resubmit the link to you so that you can get access to the handout itself. So the handout's going to follow exactly what we just did here. So anybody that's having an issue with the handout itself, they couldn't get the link to work, simply get a hold of Lance and go resubmit the
automatic transmission industry since 1954. Just a few short years after the first automatic transmissions began rolling off the assembly line. In all that time,
guys, I think we got a little ATRA sim on our
to encourage
background stuff coming in here. All right. So here we go, guys. We'll get into this.
And then he's getting a question now. He's only gone through about 1 or 2 minutes of
from its members.
Okay, so service programming. Let's start talking about service programming. You guys are going to put up a little bit of interruption here. I think Sean just put somebody on hold that's having troubles. And so I kind of have to talk over him a little bit. But let's start with this whole thing and discuss service programming, why it's important for you to know what's going on.
We're about people helping people. ATRA members are your neighbors and friends. They're part of your community. They're there for the long haul. And they're the folks you can trust to provide you with honest, reliable transmission service.
The service programming
of course, honesty and integrity are only two sides of the transmission repair triangle. The third is technical competence. And at ATRA, we provide the training, technical support, and certification to enable ATRA members to maintain a level of competence that sets the bar for everyone else. So you can be sure that the technician...
I am sending that right now. John, you should have it within a couple seconds. You got it? Cool. Go ahead and click on that.
Robert, you want to run next door to Sean? Sean, take the phone off hold because our webinar is using the ATRA commercial that comes on with the phone on hold. Yeah, well, he needs to make sure he does not have that commercial on. So anytime he puts his phone on hold, it's popping up on the webinar. Okay? All right? Thank you. Okay, guys, we should be ready to roll here. So service programming, let's talk about service programming for a minute. If you replace a transmission, a 6T70 or 6L80 or whatever it happens to be, you're going to have to program this particular transmission to fit that application. So bottom line is that it will not work in the vehicle you put it in unless you program it. So just keep that in mind on any of the 6-speed transmissions. Since the Tecum is internal to the transmission itself, it has to be programmed for the specific vehicle that you put the transmission in. Fast learn procedure. The fast learn procedure for this transmission is no different than the fast learn procedure for the other 6-speed GM transmissions. You're going to have to be able to clear the adapts and then relearn the adapts themselves. Now, one little feature we put on the bottom down of your handout, obviously on your screen, is a lot of guys forget to do this particular process. When you're all said and done, all the fast learn stuff has learned. At that point, you're going to want to make sure you shut the key off and allow the controllers to power down. At that point, you can restart the vehicle and the fast learn adapt process will function. If you do not do that, you will lose all the fast learn. So bottom line is we get guys who struggle with getting the car to fast learn correctly. You just have to make sure you shut the key off after you're done doing the actual fast learn itself. And of course, everybody in here is aware of what happens if you don't do a fast learn. You've been around 604s for years. These new 6-speeds are no different than those transmissions. It's a process you have to do, or else you're going to end up with really, really big shift quality issues with these transmissions, and it will not be acceptable to your customer. Fluid checking procedure. This is something we talked about when we went through the introduction to the 6T70. We're just kind of reiterating this to make sure everybody's on the same page. Bottom line is make sure your fluid temperature is somewhere between 180 and 200 degrees. You got a dipstick you can read that fluid level with. If you do change your fluid, make sure you reset the transmission oil life monitor. So again, nothing real different here, nothing real razzle-dazzle about it. I just want to remind everybody of the process that you use with this transmission. Now, if you are changing fluids in a 6T series transmission, remember that the filter is non-serviceable. The filter, as you can see, is between the case halves. So if you change that fluid, you're not going to be able to get access to the filter to physically make a change. So just keep that in mind. It's a fluid-only service that you're going to be doing unless you're going to disassemble the transmission for some reason. At that point, you can then change the filter when you're taking the transmission apart. One of the common things we're getting from the torque converter rebuilders right now is this complaint right here. Guys aren't aware that the seal for the TCC is actually inside the converter. It's actually on the turbine wheel. So there's no seal on the end of the turbine shaft. And if you try to install the converter with the transmission faced horizontally, it's a very good chance you're going to damage the seal. And so a lot of converter reman companies are getting these converters back because of complaints from the shop that says, hey, I've got a TCC shutter or I have a null apply type concern. And they pull the converter apart and they find the seal damaged. Well, about the only way that seal can be damaged is if you're putting the converter in with the converter in the horizontal position. So as we're showing you in the picture, this is how they want the converter installed. You're going to put a little bit of fluid in it, make sure the seal is obviously lubed up a little bit. You're not going to fill the converter full of fluid because you don't want it leaking out everywhere. And position the input shaft or turbine shaft, obviously vertical like we're showing you in the picture. Take some T-handles, weld yourself some bolts together if you want, or you can buy the GM tools. As you can see, I gave you the tool numbers there. And you simply load the converter into the transmission itself. It's that simple. But just keep in mind, any of the 6-speed front-wheel drive transmissions, they have to be loaded this way. 6T30, 6T40, 6T45, 6T50, 6T70, 6T75, and 6T80s. All of those transmissions have the seal for the converter clutch internal of the converter itself. So you got to be really careful, make sure you get this loaded the right way. One of the concerns, again, that guys pop up with is they pull a converter out of a car and it looks just like this converter looks on your screen right now. It is blue in color. That is not a problem with the converter. When they build these things, the stamping plant actually uses a compound that they put on the stamp where the machine actually presses these converter halves out. And that stamping machine is coated with what they call a release agent. And that release agent is has a dye in it. And that dye gets into the hot metal as they're stamping it. And as you can see, it discolors the converter. So again, if you do not have evidence of fluid being burned, then the torque converter is not a problem when it looks like this. So again, just don't think you have to replace it. You have to look for a problem when there actually is no problem with this transmission, with this converter. All right, one of the common issues we run into on the 6T70, 75s is a problem on the 3-4-4-3 shift. Typically, you get a bind-up type of concern. If you're running across something like that, what we're going to want you to do is we're going to want you to check the grooves for wear on that back cover. So here we're showing you using a feeder gauge on the back cover of the transmission itself. The maximum engineering tells me we can live with is 0.007 of an inch. We're starting to see some of these wear when they get more than about 70,000 miles on them. So again, a lot of shops are working on these today, and so we're starting to see these things pop in as a common thing. I was at a shop here the other day that had 5 of these transmissions apart at the same time. So bottom line is, this is an area that you do not want to ignore when you have a 6T70, 75, or 80 transmission apart. So specification, 0.007 of an inch. You can get a 0.007 in there. You're probably going to want to replace that hub. Now, if you bought the hub from GM, you buy the whole rear cover. So if you want to go that route, you can. If you buy the hub from Ford, because remember the 6F50 is basically the brother of the 6T70. So if you went to Ford and bought the 6F50, you can buy that hub separately. If you notice, that hub is bolted in. So again, either way that you want to replace it is fine with us. Just make sure you check this to be certain that you're not going to have a problem causing you a bind-up condition after this thing gets some mileage on it after you turn it back to the customer. This is a real common issue on transmissions built prior to 2010. So you can, as you can see, we got some trouble codes that can pop up. 776 is the most common one, 2723, and so forth. You're going to have a loss of some gears, reverse, third, and fifth gears. What we're going to have you do first off, guys, is simply pull the electrical connector. If you pull the electrical connector, we want to see if the transmission has reverse or not. If reverse engagement is okay, the shell is not the problem. If reverse engagement is not okay, then we're going to go after the shell. Now, what happens with the shell is this is a spun weld part. So basically what it boils down to is they use a friction weld on this sun gear. So if that friction weld fractures or breaks, it's going to look just like it looks in the left-hand side of the picture. Now, both GM and Ford have updated their parts, so you can simply go to the dealer or wherever you're going to want to get your source of your part from, and physically buy this piece. A lot of the aftermarket guys have now got the piece now, so that you can buy the sun gear from your different sources. Malibus and Auras, Prindles do not work. So your Prindle display is intermittent. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. We've had some wiring issues with these cars. Primarily the wiring issues are in these 3 connector areas. So as you can see, X206, X303, and X304. X206 is the left-hand side of the dash of the car. X303 is basically up underneath the dash, right in front of the center console. And X304, that connector is going to be right next to your shifter. And that connector has been the one that's created some biggest trouble. So we're looking for loose or damaged terminals. We're looking for issues with fretting on the terminals. Anything that could obviously be associated with an intermittent connection can certainly cause this Prindle to act up on you. So usually it's not a problem on the transmission side. It's usually a problem with the wiring on the shifter side of the circuit. Delayed shifts, incorrect shift points. These are 2010 model year only vehicles. So if you have a 6T70 and it's a 2010 model year vehicle, there is an updated calibration. They had some cal table errors that they've corrected with an updated calibration. So again, if you're running across this as an issue, make sure you have the latest and greatest calibration installed in your vehicle. This is kind of a builder error kind of thing here. We see this after somebody's had the transmission apart. This seal, as you can see, is damaged. This is your pump outlet seal. What we want you basically to do, guys, is check your line pressure. So if you have a delayed engagement issue on a 6T70, we want you to check your line pressure at idle, hot. If you got low line pressure at idle, hot, this is where you go to. You're going to go to that seal. The seal is the most common issue causing low line pressure. So again, if you got low line pressure, you're going to have delayed engagements, and it's one of those self-inflicted wound kind of things. So be really delicate with the seal when you do the installation of it. One of the more common issues we run across with all of the 6-speed transmissions is right here, setting pressure switch codes. As you can see, we've got several different kinds of codes you may set. What we want you to do, anytime you get a Tecum apart on any of the GM 6-speed transmissions, we want you to take a real hard look at the pressure switches themselves. So the basics of what we're looking for is what they call delamination. So we want you to look at the switches, see if the switches appear like they're starting to come apart. If they are, you're going to have to put a Tecum in the vehicle. Again, quite common issue. It got so bad that now the new redesigned Tecums that we're going to discuss later today on the Generation 2 vehicles do not have pressure switches in them at all. So needless to say, it got to be a pretty big issue. 6T40, of course, with their Gen 2 valve body, doesn't have pressure switches anymore. So bottom line is this has been a problem across all the 6-speed lines, and it's something you definitely want to inspect for anytime you have a GM 6-speed transmission apart. 3.5 reverse clutch. Wave plate busted, possible 776 code. You could also have some other codes, as you can see, that could be set 777, 2723, and a whole bunch of others that could possibly be set. Bottom line is this is our #1 issue we have with 6T70s. This issue itself is going to usually be found out to be a broken wave plate. When the wave plate busts, the pieces of the wave plate, of course, get out, and they can damage the case, they can damage the planetaries, they can allow the piston to overstroke, which obviously then causes a leak, which in turn causes a no apply. So lots of different symptoms that you can get with this being broken. All the earlier model 6T70s, we had an issue with this, so you're definitely going to want to take a look at it. So anything prior to 2010 would have the old design wave plates in it. So it definitely becomes an issue that you need to inspect each time you take it apart is for any damage that was been done by that wave plate being fractured. So we're showing you on the left-hand side of the screen what the case looks like after you busted the wave plate, and it's not a problem. We're showing you on the right-hand side of the screen a problem with the 2.6 clutch seating area because the wave plate got up into that seating area and beat the heck out of it. So when you look at the wave plates and they're broken, they're typically not broken into 2 pieces. They're usually broken into multiple pieces. I see them broken into 6 or 8 different chunks. And those chunks will get out of that clutch and obviously get up into the case area and can damage the case. It can also get into the planetaries and damage the planetaries. So bottom line is, anytime you got a GM front-wheel drive 6-speed apart, you're going to want to make sure you at least replace the 3.5 reverse plate. I'm about to give you the part numbers for all the wave plates. Bottom line is I probably want to put wave plates throughout the transmission itself. So every wave plate in this transmission has been updated. So you're going to want to make sure you put all the waves in them when you have them apart. This, of course, shows you the different wave plates that you're going to run into. Left-hand side of the screen, as you can see, shows you the part numbers for all the different waves. So you got the 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch, the 2.6 clutch, the 3.5 reverse, and the low reverse clutch. Every one of those wave plates physically changed. So that means to you guys that you're going to have an updated part number for every one of those wave plates. So when you pull it apart, you pull apart something that's a 2010 or earlier, you definitely should be considering putting all the waves in this transmission. The 3.5 reverse is, of course, the one that gives us the biggest troubles, but that does not necessarily mean that's the only wave plate that's going to give you problems. So you're going to want to make sure that you update all the waves. As you can see, the waves are a little different in color, medium gray versus light gray. So the new wave plates are all shot peened, in other words, stress relieved. That's how they keep them from breaking. All right, you break that wave plate. You broke the wave plate itself. And now you have another little issue. You may end up with a problem with a code 2723 set. You may end up with a no movement condition. Here is why. We've had this happen several different times. Guy goes into it, he finds the wave plate damaged, so he buys the wave plates. He puts it back together. Well, the wave plate that had been broken broke up into multiple pieces, and it ended up in the Planetary. And it ate the Planetary for lunch. So he orders a Planetary. And, of course, typical of what happens in the shop, it's Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock, and the boss wants his car out because the customer wants to take his family on a trip. So you get the Planetary in, you put the Planetary in, not paying real close attention to it, and now you have a no movement and a code 2723 set after you get done doing the repair. Now, what causes that's this. When you bought the Planetary that you purchased does not come with the ring gear that we're showing you right here. You have to buy the ring gear separately. And what happens is guys get in a hurry and they pull the Planetary carrier out of the box, snap it into the transmission without realizing that the ring gear is not there. And so that's the reason the car won't work, is because the rest of the Planetaries won't work. So what we're telling you to make sure you do is understand that you have to order both the ring gear and the Planetary as separate pieces. They don't service this as one piece. This is snap ringed in position here. So the snap ring's on the inside diameter of the ring gear teeth. So bottom line is, this can be a self-inflicted wound, cost you a lot of hate and discontent, because the bottom line is going to be you're going to take the transmission back apart for this issue. So make sure we get all the pieces in the transmission. Updated supports. The torque converter clutch support or torque converter housing support itself was updated starting in the 2007 model year, where they eliminated this bolt that we're showing here. Now this is no big deal other than the fact that you can have a hole there and no threads in that hole. So guys are looking for a bolt to be there because they had one apart earlier in the week and there was no bolt here on this one that they just took apart. Well, that's considered normal. The bottom line also is going to be these supports will transpose or back service previous applications. So when you get one apart, don't worry whether it has the bolt or does not have the bolt. It was a bolt that was physically eliminated from production. Lube troughs. The lube trough on your transmission was also updated. That was an update that was done in the 2008 model year. So this design, as you can see, only uses one bolt to hold the lube trough in place. The old design, as you can clearly see, used two bolts to hold the lube trough in place. Those lube troughs will intermix. You can back service going either direction that you want to go. Bottom line is this is not something that's going to affect durability or anything like that with the transmission. This was a cost savings measure for production. So this had nothing to do with having issues with the transmission itself in any shape or form. Carrier updates. Let's take a look at our carrier updates we're going to have. Some pretty big changes occurred in the 2009 model year for the Planetary carriers. As you can see, the output sun gear bearing for the output carrier, that pocket was changed and the bearing was changed. So there's now heavier bearing that they're actually using inside of that output carrier. Your reaction carriers, you can see there on the right-hand side, they changed the machining for the bearing and went to a different bearing on here. So again, the whole idea behind doing this was to increase the longevity of those bearings within those Planetaries so they get more mileage out of the Planetaries. These Planetaries will back service back and forth. You just have to make sure your bearings that you're using are the correct bearings for that particular Planetary. Cooler line updates. The cooler lines were changed in 2008. This change was because they were having concerns with leakage of the cooler lines themselves. So what they basically did was they changed the bore in the case where the cooler line goes. That's the reason the new updated cooler lines will not back service. So that means if you got a case, for example, that you pulled out of your core supply and you're trying to put it into a newer vehicle, something that's designed for a 2008 and later, you're going to find the cooler lines of the car will not fit. So you cannot intermix the cases of these transmissions from a 2008 and later versus a 2007 and earlier application because of the cooler line configuration. So the snouts are different on those cooler lines. Now let's talk about the biggest change that the 6T70 has undergone since it came out. We're going to call this a controls upgrade. That's what engineering actually calls it. This change is very similar to the change that the 6T40 underwent. When you look at the 6T70, you're going to find them built two different ways for 2013. One method is the old application. We're going to call that Generation 1. So a Generation 1 transmission does not contain any of the parts we're going to be going through here in a minute. The second design is Generation 2. The Generation 2 contains all the update stuff that we're going to talk about here very shortly. So the bottom line, guys, is this. These parts, for the most part, are not interchangeable. You cannot take Gen 1 parts and put them in a Gen 2. You cannot take Gen 2 parts and put them in a Gen 1. You will see why when we get into this a little bit further on. So you're going to have to be able to identify what it is you're working on. And you're going to do that by simply looking at the RPO code. So you're going to go into the glove box of these cars, and you're going to look at the M codes. M is in man. If you got an M7W or an M7U, an M7V or an M7X, this particular set of transmissions all have the Gen 2 controls. If you have any codes other than that, they do not have the Gen 2 controls. So that's how you're going to tell the difference. So bottom line is that these transmission pieces, for the most part, are not interchangeable. One of the biggest changes to occur to the 6T70 with this Gen 2 changeover was the elimination of the pressure switches. Now, we just talked about all the pressure switch issues we had. We said those pressure switches are delaminating. And we said you need to inspect those each time you take a transmission apart. So the bottom line, guys, is this. Since we don't have pressure switches anymore, we have to have another way of figuring out what the adapt values should adapt to. So we need to be able to figure out how long the shift took to occur. If you read this information that's on your screen, we're going to use a technology called clutch pulse learn. Chrysler uses this, Allison uses this, and of course the GM 6-speed here uses this. What we're intentionally going to do is put the transmission in 2 gears at one time. We're going to basically lock the transmission up as you go down the road. We're going to measure the amount of time it takes for the input speed to react to that intentional lockup issue to determine what our adapt values should be. So as you can see, the 4, 5, 6 clutch, we're going to enable that in 3rd gear, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 2, 6 clutch, 5th gear, and of course the 3, 5 reverse clutch, we're going to learn that in 6th gear. Now the kicker with this is you will get customers who come in and comment about this. We've had several shops that said they've had to educate their customers already on it. So bottom line is going to be that this is considered a normal condition. About every 1,000, 1,200 miles, it's going to go through and try to relearn those clutches. Now it's going to relearn some others earlier and some others later than that 1,200 miles. And that's all based strictly upon how often you actually use the clutch. So there's more often the clutch is cycled on and off, the more often we have to learn it. So again, there's nothing on the scan tool to show you that this is happening. There's nothing to tell the customer this is happening. It just happens. You feel this little bump every once in a while on a shift. And you're already thoroughly into gear and you feel almost like a tie-up happen on the vehicle. That's considered normal on these transmissions. And that's part of eliminating the pressure switches on this Gen 2 design. Now when you look at the Tecum on a Gen 2 design, that's the first thing you're going to see that's gone, and that's how you ID it. The top picture shows you the designs with the pressure switches, so this is the Gen 1 Tecum. The bottom picture shows you a design without the pressure switches. That's a Gen 2 Tecum. They are absolutely not interchangeable. The solenoids are also different. We've gone from normally low to normally high solenoids, so bottom line is we've got some that are controlling feed and some that are controlling exhaust. So you cannot interchange these TECMs because you're going to get yourself in real big trouble. So even though the bolts would bolt up, you don't want to do that. Spacer plates had to change to match the TECM. So the channeling in the valve body, channeling in the channel plate area, and of course the oil feed holes through the spacer plate all changed. How you ID which spacer plate you have is pretty simple. Look at the cover that you see there in the upper left-hand corner of your display. If you got that square kind of cover on it, that of course is a first design. If you got the cover with the gasket on it, that's the second design. So that would be a Gen 2 type of spacer plate. As we talked about earlier, the channel plate and the valve body, all that kind of stuff changed with this design change. As you can see here, we've added 3 of the little spring-loaded accumulator feed pistons. We've had those in our transmissions before. Those little rubber, look like little rubber check valves. We've basically added 3 of them to this new design. Valve body, of course, also changed, and what you're going to see for IDs in the valve body, simply look for this check ball that we're showing you in the upper right-hand picture. If you have that check ball, that is a Gen 2 design valve body. If you do not have the check ball, that's a Gen 1 design valve body. And a lot of the oil channeling and stuff changed in this valve body. So bottom line, guys, is they made a change to the valve body itself to accommodate this particular design change that we're having right here. Now, effectively, every valve in this transmission made a change. And so your handout, and that's the reason I tell you it's really valuable to have this handout, your handout is going to show you pictures of this. So you're going to have to be able to ID these valves so you can ID what it is you've got. As you can see, pressure regulator valve was changed. We get the first design in the top left-hand corner of the picture, and second design is the lower left-hand corner. So bottom line is that valve change, we're showing you the different IDs. You can see the 2.6 regulator valve, first design and second design. The 4.5.6 clutch, first design, second design regulator valve. The solenoid number 2, select valve number 2, first design and second design. 3.5 reverse boost valve, first design and second design. Actuator feed limit valve, first design and second design. One, 2, 3, 4 clutch regulator valve, first design and second design. 3.5 reverse clutch regulator valve, first design and second design. So as you're seeing, every one of these valves within this transmission have changed. Well, they also changed springs with all this stuff. So as you can see here, here's my isolator valve spring. We're giving you coil dimensions on that spring in millimeters. And we're also showing you the accumulator piston spring, first design and second design, and even the retainer for the accumulator piston changed. Every clutch in this transmission has made a change. So the first one we're showing is a low reverse clutch. As you can see, the steel discs changed. We're giving you ID for those discs. The friction discs changed, and we're giving you the IDs for those discs. The 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch, everything changed with it. As you can see, there's a different piston assembly. So the fingers are a different height on that 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch piston. And of course, the discs all changed. So we're showing you the difference here in your discs themselves and their designs so that you can ID what it is you actually have. The snap ring also changed, as you can see, that holds that sprag in position. 3.5 reverse clutch. Just like the other clutches, everything changed with it. So a different set of steel plates, as you can see, upper left-hand corner, different set of snap rings, and of course, different wave plate designs and friction plate designs. So bottom line is, again, make sure that you got all the pieces you're supposed to have and that you pay attention to the pieces you're putting in these transmissions. Clutch drums also changed. As you can see here, we've got a picture of the 4.5, 6, 3.5 reverse clutch housing from the back. And we're saying part of the ID could be simply looking for the part numbers that are embedded into the back of that support. If you turn that whole assembly around, you would see that we've got some holes drilled into it. And so by looking at the hole designs, they've added 4 holes on that 456 clutch dam on one picture on the left-hand side. They've added 3 more holes on the right-hand side picture. So again, you can physically look to see if those holes are there to tell you if you have a first design or second design 45635 reverse housing. Even the pistons for that 456 clutch pack changed. The upper picture that you've got shows you the piston, which was the early design piston, which has 4 holes cut in it. The right-hand side picture there, you can see, has 12 holes cut in that piston. The return springs also changed at the same time with this. So as you can see, the return springs are on the bottom of the page itself. Left-hand side return spring is the previous design. Right-hand side return springs are, of course, going to be the updated design. And we, of course, can't leave well enough alone. We're going to have to change even the turbine shaft of this transmission. So they've added some holes in the turbine shaft for the compensator feed circuits. The compensator feed circuits are for the compensator pistons that are mounted inside your clutch housings themselves. So we've added some holes to increase our oil volume feed into the compensator circuit. The compensator springs that you're going to have in that rear cover, that's the same cover we talked about that we had issues with that hub wearing, and we talked about using the feeler gauge on. Well, that spring in that rear cover also changed for the blow-off valve. And of course, along with that, we get to the back end of the transmission. The snap ring has changed. The case has changed for holding the snap ring, and all the 2.6 clutch has changed. So we've updated not only the case and the snap ring, but also the clutch pack that goes back there. So as you guys can pretty well see, there's a heck of a lot of changes that occurred with this Gen 2 valve body update that was done for the 2013 model year. So again, you're going to want to keep this stuff handy, because you're going to have to be able to ID the parts when you start seeing these new designs start to roll in. So in another year or so, you'll start seeing this new stuff roll through your shop, unless you're already doing warranty work for GM dealers. At that point, you're probably going to see it here pretty darn soon. And you need to know, do you have a first design or a second design part, because that's what your parts man is going to be asking you. Well, that pretty well concludes our webinar for today. We would like to thank you very much for attending. I don't see any other questions in the queue. So again, we'd like to thank you for attending. We hope you'll fill out the survey that follows our webinar. And again, thanks for attending, and we'll see you at the next ATRA webinar. Have yourself a good week.
Steve, we do have a couple of questions, bud.
All right,
Steve?
No? Yes, Lance.
We do have a couple of questions up there. You want me to take a look at?
Okay. All right, so I'm going to see if I can pull the questions down here. I can't get the one question. Okay. Okay. Are all these updates improvements for durability? Good question there, guys. Yes, they are durability updates, and they're also shift feel updates. These 6-speed transmissions, since this is a clutch-to-clutch, what they would classify a clutch-to-clutch shift type transmission, they've had some issues with shift feel. So, guys, what it boils down to is they're there for 2 things. They're there to change durability, as well as obviously affect shift feel. So that's the idea behind the clutch changes themselves. And I don't see any other questions that have popped up here. All right, so again, thank you guys very much for attending, and we'll see you at the next ATRA webinar.